Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. And today I'm beyond excited to finally go deep on a topic I've always wanted to cover on the channel, and that's Abdullah, the man who created Neville Goddard. Before we begin, I want to invite you to join the Reality Revolution tribe. You can find the link in the description at skool.com, skool.com/Reality Revolution, where I hold weekly group coaching sessions, networking sessions, masterminds. You can find exclusive content with audiobooks and meditations you can find nowhere else, and an amazing group of people that are working together to help you manifest your goals. I hope to see you there. The room is on the first floor. Inside, an old man sits in a chair. He is dark-skinned. Neville would later describe him as black as the ace of spades. He wears a turban. He is enormous in presence, if the stories are accurate. Rabbis come to study with him. He speaks Hebrew fluently. He teaches the Kabbalah as a psychological system. He reads the Bible as a manual for human consciousness. And the moment the young man walks through the door, before a single introduction is made, the old man looks at him and says his name. "I know you," he says. "We were together in China thousands of years ago, but you promised to completely forget in order to play the part you must play now." The young man's name is Neville Goddard. He is 26 years old. He came to America to be a dancer. He's been performing in vaudeville and touring Europe. He has recently been lecturing in Rosicrucian circles. A 1931 issue of the Rosicrucian Fellowship magazine lists him as a guest lecturer in Cleveland, praised for his deep knowledge and helpful affection for his fellow humans. He is already seeking. He is already teaching. But he has found nothing that satisfies the depth of what he is looking for until this moment, until this room, until this man. For the next 5 to 7 years, Neville will study with this person every single day. Hebrew, Kabbalah, the hidden meaning of Scripture, the psychological architecture of the Bible, the creative power of imagination. And from this apprenticeship, everything, every lecture, every book, every technique, every insight that has reached millions of people across 3 generations will emerge. The old man's name is Abdullah. And for over 50 years after Neville's death, nobody could find any record that he ever existed until now. Here's the problem that has haunted Neville Goddard researchers for decades. Neville talked about Abdullah constantly. He told vivid, specific, spanning, detailed stories about this man across dozens of lectures for 35 years. He described his appearance, his personality, his teaching style, his eating habits, his address. He told the story of Abdullah taking him to the Metropolitan Opera on Good Friday to hear Wagner's Parsifal. He described Abdullah marching up to the box office, a black man in Jim Crow-era America, and demanding 2 seats in the center section. He described the way Abdullah slammed doors when a conversation was over. He described the enormous meals Abdullah would eat, washed down with ale, preceded by 3 shots of rye. These are vivid, specific human details. They paint a portrait of a real person, eccentric, powerful, unapologetically himself, utterly unconcerned with the racial politics of his era. Neville told the story of Abdullah and the Barbados Trip, the defining demonstration of the teaching. Neville wanted to visit his family in Barbados for Christmas, but had no money for passage. Abdullah told him it was done, that he was already in Barbados. Neville kept bringing up the lack of funds, the absence of a ticket, the impossibility of the situation, and Abdullah would hear none of it. When Neville persisted, Abdullah walked to his study, slammed the door, and said over his shoulder, "I have said all that I have to say." That was the entire instruction. Live in the end. Assume the journey is complete. Stop discussing the conditions that seem to prevent it. And within days, Neville received a letter from his brother with first-class passage to Barbados. Think about what that story reveals about Abdullah's teaching method. There was no explanation, no technique demonstration, no 12-step process. The teacher stated the truth, refused to engage with the student's doubt, and literally closed the door. The teaching was the behavior. The instruction was the refusal to discuss limitations. Abdullah embodied the principle so completely that proximity to him was the lesson. Neville also described Abdullah's bluntness. A woman once came to Abdullah in Atlantic City, offering him $300 to use his powers to destroy a man in her neighborhood. Abdullah's response was immediate. "My dear, whoever advised you this way is silly." He dismissed the request with a single sentence and moved on. He described Abdullah at the Metropolitan Opera box office, marching up as a black man in 1930s New York and saying, "I want two in the center," without a trace of hesitation. The man lived as though the limitations of his era were irrelevant, and they yield to his certainty. And yet, when researchers went looking for this man in the historical record, they found almost nothing. There was no biography. There were no photographs that would definitively confirm him. There were no books published under the name Abdullah that matched the teaching Neville described. The man who created one of the most influential mystical teachers of the 20th century appeared to have left zero footprint in the historical archive. I've seen people suspect that maybe he wasn't real, and I've seen references that clearly were not accurate. The internet filled the gap with speculation for years. The most popular theory was that Abdullah was Arnold Josiah Ford, a charismatic black Hebrew rabbi in Harlem who was fluent in Hebrew, founded multiple congregations, and was a 33rd degree Mason. The surface details seemed to match, but the deeper record destroyed the theory. Ford was born in 1877. Neville repeatedly described Abdullah as being in his late 80s when they met around 1931, which would place Abdullah's birth in the 1840s or 1850s. Ford would have been only 54. The age was wrong, the timeline was wrong, the metaphysics were wrong. Ford was a black nationalist focused on identity politics and Zionism. Abdullah was teaching the psychological architecture of Scripture and the Kabbalah as a system of consciousness. The mystery stood for 50 years, and then a researcher named Tima Vlasto, working through the archives at Cool Wisdom Books, began pulling on a thread that led somewhere extraordinary. The investigation begins here, in the newspaper archives of Atlantic City, New Jersey. Vlasto found a trail of advertisements, census records, church filings, and copyright registrations that trace the life of a man named Modeste, Abdallah, Guillaume. Guillaume was born in North Africa. Census records variously list Morocco and Algeria as his birthplace, with Arabic as his mother tongue. He immigrated to the United States in 1889. He was a classically trained baritone who had studied under the Lamperti vocal tradition, one of the most prestigious schools of operatic singing in Europe. He arrived in America and went to work. Between 1905 and 1909, Guillaume was a member of the Williams and Walker Glee Club, the biggest black musical theater company in America at the turn of the century. This was serious, professional, touring musical theater. Williams and Walker played London. They mounted full-scale productions with orchestras, choreography, and professional scores. Guillaume even landed a role in their production of Bandana Land. The members of the Glee Club were selected from top conservatories. These were elite musicians. When the Williams and Walker Company collapsed, Guillaume reinvented himself. He settled in Atlantic City and opened the Bel Canto Conservatory at 1708 Arctic Avenue, billing himself as an Arabian composer and artist. The 1910 federal census lists him as Modeste Abdallah Guillaume, age 40, born Morocco, mother tongue Arabic, immigrated 1889. Interestingly, the enumerator marked him as OT, other, rather than black. In Jim Crow America, that distinction mattered enormously. The Abdallah presentation, the Arabic identity, the North African origin, all of it opened doors that would have been closed to a man simply categorized as a black vaudeville baritone. And then around 1920, something shifted. Something inside this man, this classically trained vocalist who had performed on the biggest black stages in America, who had reinvented himself as an Arabian composer in a beachside city, who had navigated the brutal racial landscape of early 20th century America through sheer force of identity, began to pivot toward the spiritual. The music became the vehicle, the stage became the pulpit, the performer became the priest. What triggered the shift is unknown. The archival record shows the external transformation but is silent on the internal catalyst. Perhaps it was the collapse of his performing career. Perhaps it was an experience, a vision, a revelation, an encounter that redirected the trajectory of his life the way Abdullah's teachings would later redirect Neville's. Whatever the cause, the evidence is clear. By 1920, the man who had spent 2 decades as a professional musician was advertising himself as a spiritual teacher, and the advertisements reveal a sophisticated synthesis of traditions that suggest he had been studying quietly for years before going public. The newspaper advertisements tell the story. Through the 1910s, Guillaume's ads are for vocal instruction, bel canto technique, performance coaching, music. By 1920, the ads change. Guillaume begins advertising the Church of the Religion of Love and Spiritualistic Phenomena, Inc. He starts advertising the Church of Abdallah. He begins inviting Christ scientists, psychics, and followers of New Thought to join him. His ads promise introduction in the mystery books of Moses, the materialization of things invisible, and psychic control. The phrase, the mystery books of Moses, is a key that unlocks the entire investigation. In the New Thought and spiritualistic circles of the 1910s through the 1930s, this phrase almost always referred to the 6th and 7th books of Moses, popular occult grimoires filled with Kabbalah-derived seals, psalms, and magical correspondences. These books were widely circulated in black spiritualists' churches and storefront temples across the eastern seaboard. So when Neville later remembered Abdullah as the man who knew the Bible and its symbolism, it matches exactly what Guillaume was already advertising in Atlantic City, a synthesis of Kabbalah, New Thought, spiritualism, and the psychological interpretation of Scripture. By 1923, the transformation deepened further. Guillaume's name began appearing in records as G. Mahmud Ahmad Abdullah. In the January 1924 issue of the Muslim Sunrise, the journal of Ahmadiyya Muslim Mission in the United States, a new converts column lists G.M. Abdullah. Guillaume had apparently affiliated with the Ahmadiyya movement, adopting the naming convention the mission encouraged while maintaining his existing New Thought and Kabbalistic teaching intact. He also published a pamphlet titled Science of Applied Mind Control and Wealth of Abdullistic Metaphysiology in 1923. He advertised the order of master students open to all who would have health, happiness, peace, and prosperity, describing it as the royal road to light, and offering instruction in the masonry of the Nazarites alongside his metaphysical Kabbalah, joining fee $1. Think about the layers of identity this man was synthesizing. North African birth, classical European vocal training, professional black musical theater, spiritualistic church founder, Kabbalistic teacher, New Thought practitioner, Ahmadiyya convert, all flowing through a single human being who was, by every account, utterly comfortable holding all of these identities simultaneously. And here's where the investigation delivers its most important breakthrough. Neville Goddard repeatedly stated that Abdullah lived at 30 West 72nd Street, just off Central Park West. I actually got a chance to go when I visited New York. He said in multiple lectures across many years, the address was consistent and specific. It was the anchor point. Researchers initially assumed the building belonged to Morgenthau. Neville had mentioned the name in passing, but the actual records revealed something different and far more interesting. The building at 30 West 72nd Street was purchased in 1923 by a man named W. Henry Zay. Zay was also a Lamperti-trained baritone, the exact same vocal lineage as Guillaume, and Zay was an anthroposophist, a follower of Rudolf Steiner's esoteric Christian philosophy. He turned 30 West 72nd Street into a combination vocal studio, lecture hall, and esoteric meeting space with a small auditorium called Hall Number 1 and eurythmy classes. When Zay died in 1927, his widow, financially strained, began renting rooms. The building became a hub for New York's spiritualistic and esoteric community. The first spiritualistic church held programs there starting in 1929. The famous trance medium Arthur Ford hosted sessions from the address between 1929 and 1943. Billet readers, message mediums, and metaphysical lecturers of every description cycled through the building throughout the 1930s, and Abdullah was there. Cool Wisdom Books found newspaper advertisements placing G. Mahmud Ahmad Abdullah, Egyptian Master of the Mysteries, lecturing at locations near 72nd Street, including the Manhattan Church at Broadway and 76th Street, offering free public lectures on what is truth, the unity, the ancient way restored, and detaching mind from self. A 1928 advertisement placed him directly on West 72nd Street. And then came the discovery that sealed it: 9 copyright registrations from 1935, all for songs composed by Abdullah, every single one listing 30 West 72nd Street, New York, New York, as the address. 1935, the heart of the period when Neville was studying with him daily. Abdullah was still composing music while teaching Neville the Kabbalah. The baritone had become the rabbi, but the musician was still alive inside him. One of the songs was subtitled Rest, a word that in New Thought tradition refers to the Sabbath. The mental state of knowing your creative act is already complete. The language of the law encoded in a song title registered at the address where Neville sat at Abdullah's feet every day. A 1935 Catskill Society column provided the final confirmation. They were accompanied on the trip by G. Ahmad Abdullah, the Arabian philosopher, composer, and poet, and his secretary, Miss Zeta Roberts of New York. The Abdullah is past 90 years of age. He teaches singing and conducts classes in philosophy at his home in New York City. Past 90 years of age. That matches Neville's repeated descriptions of Abdullah as being extremely old, teaching, singing, and conducting classes in philosophy. That matches the baritone mystic identity perfectly. At his home in New York City, the address on the copyright registrations, 30 West 72nd Street. The circle closes. The ghost in the archive has a name, a face, a profession, a paper trail, and an address that matches Neville's account down to the street number. And there's one more layer to this story that reads something out of a film. Harry Houdini, the world's most famous magician and escape artist, spent the final years of his life on a personal crusade to expose fraudulent spiritualists and mediums. He hired undercover investigators to infiltrate spiritualistic churches, attend seances, and obtain evidence of fraud. One of Houdini's investigators was a woman named Ruth Mackenberg. She operated under aliases, attended sessions, and collected certificates and receipts as evidence. In 1929, she obtained a certificate under the alias Alicia Bunk from someone connected to Abdullah's circles. The bust was splashed across newspapers nationwide. This means that Abdullah, the man who would become Neville Goddard's teacher, the man who transmitted the entire framework of imaginative creation that has reached millions of people, was operating in the direct crosshairs of the most famous debunker in American history. Harry Houdini's intelligence network was surveilling the same spiritualistic scene that Abdullah inhabited. And Abdullah kept going. He kept teaching. He kept lecturing. He moved from Atlantic City to West 72nd Street, set up inside a building full of mediums and spiritualists, and continued his work. Whatever Houdini's investigators found or failed to find, Abdullah was not disturbed. He was still teaching at 30 West 72nd Street years later when a young man from Barbados walked through the door, and had his entire life redirected. I want to talk about something that matters deeply to me, and I think it matters to everyone in this community. When Neville described his time with Abdullah, he described something that almost completely absent from the modern spiritual landscape: a long apprenticeship, 5 to 7 years every day, sitting with one teacher, studying one system, going deeper and deeper into a single body of knowledge until it became part of his cellular structure. Abdullah taught Neville Hebrew letter by letter. He taught him the Kabbalah, the tree of life, the paths, the correspondences, as a map of human consciousness. He taught him to read the Bible in its original languages and to see every character, every event, every genealogy as a description of psychological states within the human mind. He took Neville to the opera. He fed him enormous meals. He slammed doors when the conversation was over. He lived his teaching every single day in every single action, and Neville absorbed all of it. He absorbed it so completely that by the time he began lecturing publicly in 1938, the teaching was indistinguishable from the man. He could quote Hebrew from memory. He could connect Genesis to Revelation in a single sentence. He could hold an audience for an hour without notes, weaving between the practical and the mystical, between the personal story and the cosmic principle, because the framework had been installed at the deepest level through years of daily immersion. Compare that to how most people encounter spiritual teaching today: a 10-minute YouTube video, a 30-second TikTok, a headline that promises to reveal the one secret technique that will change your life. I know I'm guilty of that. And then confusion when it fails to produce the results that Neville demonstrated across 35 years of public work. Abdullah's teaching method reveals something important about transformation. It requires time in some cases. It requires depth. It requires immersion. It requires a relationship between teacher and student that goes beyond information transfer and into the territory of energetic transmission. Neville absorbed a consciousness from Abdullah, something far deeper than a technique. He sat in the presence of a man who embodied the teaching so completely that the teaching transferred through proximity, through daily contact, through osmosis. I've thought about this extensively in relation to my own work with this community. I've been creating content for 8 years. I've read 336 or more of Neville's lectures on this channel. I've produced thousands of hours of meditations, activations, and teaching episodes. And the thing I've learned, the thing that Abdullah understood and Neville demonstrated, is that depth of the transformation is proportional to the depth of the immersion. There are no shortcuts. There are no depths. And I think this is the most important thing that Abdullah's story can teach us in 2026. We live in an era of instant access and zero commitment. The average person will watch a manifestation video for 8 minutes, try the technique once, and conclude that it fails when nothing changes by Thursday. Abdullah would have found this incomprehensible. He immersed himself in metaphysics for over a decade before he began teaching publicly. He spent the better part of his adult life mastering a synthesis of Kabbalah, New Thought, spiritualism, and scripture interpretation before a single student walked through his door. The teaching he transmitted to Neville was the distillation of a lifetime of practice, study, and lived experience. When Neville said imagination creates reality, it sounded simple. That simplicity is deceptive. Behind those 3 words stood 7 years of daily Kabbalistic study, decades of Abdullah's own immersion in the mystery traditions, and a lineage of spiritualistic churches of the Eastern Seaboard through the Masonic lodges of Harlem and into the ancient streams of Hebrew mysticism. The technique is simple. The consciousness required to make it work is the product of depth, time, and relentless commitment to understanding. Abdullah gave Neville the raw material. He gave him Hebrew, Kabbalah, the psychological interpretation of scripture, and the fundamental principle that imagination creates reality. Neville took that raw material and built something entirely his own, something that transcended the teacher and reached millions of people who would never know Abdullah's name. That is the mark of a great teacher. The student becomes greater than the master, and that is the mark of a great student. He honors the source while surpassing it. To fully understand Abdullah, you have to understand the world he inhabited, because 1920s and 1930s Harlem was unlike any other place on earth. It was the Harlem Renaissance, the most explosive period of Black intellectual, artistic, and spiritual creativity in American history, and running beneath the literature, the jazz, the poetry, and the politics was a hidden current of esoteric experimentation that most history books completely ignore. Harlem in this era was teeming with robed mystics, underground lodges, and Hebrew prayers in rented storefronts. Black Hebrew Israelite congregations operated alongside Moorish science temples. Garveyite meeting halls shared blocks with theosophical reading rooms. Masonic lodges of every description, Prince Hall, Scottish Rite, Esoteric, and Regular, held meetings in basements and upper floor sanctuaries throughout the neighborhood. Spiritualistic churches offered message services and seances on Sundays. New Thought practitioners lectured on the power of the mind to create reality. And in the middle of all this, figures move who bridged multiple traditions simultaneously. Abdullah was one of them, a North African baritone who sang opera, taught Kabbalah, founded a spiritualist church, published metaphysical pamphlets, affiliated with the Ahmadiyya mission, and referenced the mystery books of Moses, all while maintaining an identity that was simultaneously Arabic, Jewish, Islamic, and Christian in ways that would be almost impossible to categorize by any single label. This was the soil from which Neville Goddard's teaching emerged. It came from a place where boundaries between traditions were fluid, where a single teacher could hold the Torah in one hand and a spiritualist certificate in the other, where the lines between magic and prayer and imagination and faith were blurred beyond recognition. Abdullah lived in the intersection of everything, and he transmitted that intersection to Neville, who refined it, simplified it, and broadcast it to the world. And here's a detail that deepens the picture even further: the Rosicrucian Fellowship. Max Heindel's Esoteric Christian organization had their New York headquarters at 210 West 72nd Street, the same block as Abdullah's residence at 30 West 72nd Street. West 72nd Street in the late 20s and early 30s was an esoteric corridor, a dense concentration of spiritualist churches, anthroposophical study groups, Rosicrucian fellowship halls, and metaphysical practitioners operating within a few blocks of each other. Neville was lecturing in Rosicrucian circles as early as 1931, 7 years before the official start date of his public career. The Cool Wisdom Books team uncovered a 1931 issue of the Rosicrucian Fellowship magazine listing Neville as a guest lecturer in Cleveland, described as a visiting speaker from New York with deep knowledge. This means Neville was already publicly teaching spiritual ideas while simultaneously studying with Abdullah. The apprenticeship and the public work were happening in parallel, feeding each other. And the man who introduced Neville to Abdullah was himself a remarkable character. Neville described him as a former would-be Catholic priest whose father had died and left him thousands of dollars, which he proceeded to spend with reckless abandon. Neville had zero respect for his financial judgment, but this man, researchers have traced him as a figure known as Wall Street David, who lost $2 million on the stock market, had found Abdullah and recognized something genuine in the teaching. He kept inviting Neville to attend a class. Neville kept making excuses until one day he ran out of excuses and walked into the room on 72nd Street, and Abdullah already knew his name. Joseph Murphy, the author of The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, is one of the few people besides Neville to mention Abdullah by name. Murphy also studied with Abdullah during this same period in New York. The two greatest popular teachers of the law of assumption in the 20th century, Neville Goddard and Joseph Murphy, both came from the same source, an old man in a turban at 30 West 72nd Street who taught the Bible as psychology and the Kabbalah as the architecture of consciousness. I want to close with something personal. When I first started reading Neville Goddard, Abdullah was a mysterious, almost mythic figure, an Ethiopian rabbi who appeared out of nowhere, transformed Neville's life, and then vanished from the historical record. He seemed almost too perfect to be real. Some people speculated he was invented. Others speculated he was a composite character. The absence of records made it easy to doubt. At times I thought Neville had invented him for his philosophy. And then researchers like Team of Losto at Cool Wisdom Books began doing the painstaking archival work, newspaper clippings, census records, church filings, copyright registrations, society columns, and a real human being emerged from the silence. Modeste Abdullah Guillaume, born in North Africa, immigrated to America in 1889, sang with the Williams and Walker Glee Club, opened a bel canto studio in Atlantic City, founded a metaphysical church, published pamphlets on applied mind control, composed 9 songs registered at 30 West 72nd Street in the very year he was teaching Neville Goddard. He was real. He was human. He was complicated, contradictory, brilliant, and alive. He contained multitudes. He was a singer and a rabbi and a mystic and a Kabbalist and possibly a member of the Ahmadiyya mission, and definitely a man who ate enormous meals washed down with ale and 3 shots of rye. He was everything and everyone at once, and he poured all of it into a young man from Barbados who would carry it to the world. The investigation also reveals something beautiful about how transformation travels through history. It moves person to person. It moves through rooms, through relationships, through daily contact sustained over years. Abdullah gave it to Neville. Neville gave it to his audiences. His audiences gave it to their children and their friends, and eventually to the internet, where it reached millions of people who never heard the name Modeste Abdullah Guillaume. And I gave it to you through this channel, through 8 years of reading, recording, teaching, and exploring the depths of this material. The chain is unbroken, from a North African baritone in Atlantic City to a Barbadian dancer in Harlem to a voice on your phone in the middle of the night speaking words that rearrange something in your consciousness. Frank Carter said of Neville, "This man stepped out of the pages of Scripture and came to us and gave us the great secret." But Neville stepped out of the pages of Scripture because Abdullah taught him how to read those pages. Without the teacher, there is no teaching. Without the 7 years in that room at 30 West 72nd Street, there are no 336 or more lectures. There's no reality revolution. There's no you listening to this episode having your understanding of reality fundamentally expanded by ideas originated in a bel canto studio in Atlantic City over 100 years ago. The ghost in the archive has a name. The mystery has a face. And the teaching continues from mouth to ear, from mind to mind, from one consciousness to another, across centuries, across continents, across the illusion of time itself, into YouTube videos and books, to now. Abdullah is still teaching through Neville, through this channel, through you. If you're listening to this and feeling something stir inside you, a recognition, a resonance, a sense that this material is speaking directly to something you've always known but have never articulated, then you are already in the lineage. You are already a part of the chain. The teaching found you the same way it found Neville, through a series of events that appeared random but were, in retrospect, perfectly orchestrated by the very intelligence that Abdullah spent his life trying to help people understand. A North African man, born in the 1800s, trained in European opera, performing in Black American musical theater, founding a spiritualist church in Atlantic City, publishing Kabbalistic pamphlets, composing songs at 30 West 72nd Street, sitting in a room with a turbaned head while rabbis came to study with him, and a young Barbadian dancer absorbed the secrets of creation. And that chain of events produced the words you are hearing in this moment. Every link in that chain was necessary. Every single one. This is how the universe works. This is how transformation travels. This is how the teaching moves through time. And this is why the investigation matters, because when you understand where the teaching came from, you understand the depth of what you are holding. You are holding something that was forged across continents, cultures, across a century of human seeking. And it was forged specifically so that it could reach you, here, now, in whatever room you're sitting in as you listen to these words. You can find all episodes of The Reality Revolution at therealityrevolution.com. Be sure to check out the website. It's been updated, and you can find recent information about where our most recent events are being hosted. Right now, we have an event being hosted in Maui on May 14th through the 17th. We have an event in Anaheim on July 24th through the 26th. We'll soon be announcing events in Austin in September and Sedona in November. I hope you can attend one of them. They're amazing experiences. I'm sending all my light, all my love to everyone listening, and welcome to the Reality Revolution. There is a version of your life where everything you've been reaching for arrives, where the money flows, where love opens, where your body heals, where every step carries the frequency of the self you were always meant to be. That life exists, and the path to it has been 8 years in the making. This July, the Reality Revolution comes home to Anaheim. 3 full days of teaching, meditation, and timeline activation. 9 complete sessions designed to move you from the life that you're living to the life that is waiting. Activate your pineal gland, meet your higher self, quantum jump into your greatest timeline, enter the bliss body healing state, step into the flow of large sums of money, open fully to love, shift to a higher density new earth. Friday night, the community celebrates together. Saturday evening, a special appearance from Daryl Anka. And by Sunday evening, you walk out as the version of yourself your future self has been waiting for.
I knew I had to be in the room because it's different from like listening to the meditation videos online.
It was really getting into yourself and how you feel and your timelines.
It's time at the event, and it really is. It's wonderful. So I would highly recommend to anyone, if you get the opportunity to do it, absolutely do it. It really is amazing.
The Reality Revolution live in Anaheim, July 24th, 25th, and 26th. Hilton, Anaheim. 3 days that will change the trajectory of your life. Claim your seat at www.brianscottlive.com/Anaheim.